a water utility shut down a majority of their wells due to really high levels of PFAS. And so this is kind of the first time that we're seeing utilities actually shut down because of a contaminant. Of course, with biological contamination, this can kind of be a thing that they don't really shut down the utility, but they will issue a boil water advisory. So this particular instance is completely different because they're shutting down wells because a contaminant is present. So it's kind of like a totally different ball game with this situation. So we're going to talk about a municipality called Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And if you've been watching our Instagram stories or following us on social media, you probably noticed that we have talked about Eau Claire several times. I hope that answered your question. Eau Claire, Wisconsin is where this is happening. So we've kind of been talking about this for the past week or so on our social media. So we're gonna dive right into it. And so PFAS pollution contaminated about half of the 18 drinking water wells in Eau Claire. And the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources is, they're thinking that the contamination originated from the Chippewa Regional Airport. And so this is the least surprising thing that we've heard, honestly. Airports and military bases we know are really prominent sources of PFAS contamination. And that's just because of an ingredient in firefighting foam called PFAS, which is what we're talking about, is used pretty frequently in most firefighting foams. It's called aqueous firefighting foam. AFFF is another thing that you'll hear me mention today. And so basically the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources is thinking that the use of firefighting foam on this airport base or airport, if they have some sort of deal with local firefighters or even like a nearby military base, whatever it is, that the use of this aqueous firefighting foam trickled down into nearby water sources, and in this case, into those wells. So you might be familiar with, Pease Air Force Base or Camp Lejeune, where a similar situation happened. Obviously, those are military installations, but kind of like a similar deal here. Like they were using firefighting foam in a lot of their on-base activities, and that firefighting foam entered into the drinking water source, creating really, really high levels of PFAS in the on-base tap water. And so kind of the similar situation is now happening with Eau Claire. So how is Eau Claire mitigating this problem? Once you have PFAS in a water source, it's very difficult to mitigate because it's persistent and it's hard to remove. It's expensive to remove at the municipal level. There are tons of different factors that go into actually addressing PFAS. And so the course of action that the city of Eau Claire has taken is actually creating these absorption ponds or, contamination lagoons where they're just grabbing water from the wells and kind of dumping it into these designated areas that aren't the water source. And so the whole point of that is to at least start reducing the concentration in the drinking water source by putting it elsewhere. And so there are obvious issues with taking this route of mitigation. I'm going to find a quote that the utilities manager for Eau Claire said, and he said that the area where the absorption ponds are located, quote, should not impact municipal water. So that's, kind of vague. It doesn't really instill a lot of trust in the location of these absorption ponds. And so with PFAS, they can travel through groundwater, through soils. And so these absorption ponds are actually unlined and problematic to aquatic species, which, PFAS are known to bioaccumulate in fish. So it's not really mitigating the problem. It's simply moving the problem to a different location. And so with that, the utility provider basically told residents, it's not a big deal. This is a precautionary thing that we've shut down these wells. Like it's, the levels of PFAS are under the state's hazard index, which is a non-enforceable level of PFAS. And so, so that's kind of the situation that we're at in Eau Claire. And so going into, what's next for the city, there aren't really any mitigation plans in place. And that's because Eau Claire doesn't know the extent of the problem. So PFAS plumes, or, the area that's contaminated in the groundwater, in the soil, are really difficult to track, especially if you're in a smaller municipality where you don't really have a lot of funding, and you're not getting a lot of support from the state or the federal government. So Eau Claire has hired an engineering firm to kind of help determine where the plume is and really get some guidance on how they should address this problem. And so with that, the utilities manager has stated that PFAS levels have decreased in 5 of the wells, which is great. And that's really, because they're removing the PFAS contaminated water and putting it elsewhere. So it's definitely a positive thing that they're decreasing in the drinking water wells. But again, it's not really fixing the problem. It's just moving the problem and contaminating water elsewhere. And so I also wanted to point out that, this isn't the only city where this is happening. This is certainly one of the first examples that we've seen. But a community in Delaware called Bethany Crest also had a similar situation. And their water was, entirely offline. The community was telling the residents to only use bottled water, for the time being. And of course, they're buying it themselves, which can certainly add up. So they were suggesting to residents to use bottled water for not only drinking, but cooking as well. And so I guess to kind of wrap this all up, why are we seeing this happening? Why are water utilities all of a sudden kind of going offline when we know that PFAS have been a problem for decades, and not just, the past 6 months when these utilities are starting to test for it? And the answer to that is really because of the new statewide regulations. And so I think we're at 15 states now have some sort of acceptable level of PFAS, and some of them aren't enforceable, so they have a little bit of leeway. The municipalities have leeway in terms of testing and removing. But in other states, they're saying this is the level that you have to comply with. If you exceed this level, then you have to mitigate the problem. Your utility has to completely go offline. And so we can expect to see this kind of ramp up. We can expect to see more municipalities going offline or shutting down portions of their water supplies because of these new enforceable standards. I mean, it's impossible to ask a city with 60,000 people to all of a sudden purchase the technology, the expensive multi-million-dollar technology to address this harmful contaminant. So we can certainly expect to see these utility shutdowns or even like temporary, bottled water advisories where your municipality is suggesting that you purchase bottled water. And so I think just to finally wrap this up, again, I'm going to read a quote from the utilities manager from the city of Eau Claire. And the point of this is to help tell our listeners that it's important to kind of do your own research and know for yourself if your water is safe, and not just listening to kind of people tell you that it's safe. So the utilities manager for the city of Eau Claire said that the city of Eau Claire's water is safe and always has been. And so we've seen this before. The example that I always come back to is the mayor of Newark. When a couple of years ago, he claimed that Newark had, quote, some of the best water in New Jersey, and that it was completely safe. And the reality is that same year, Newark's lead levels were almost twice as high as the national standard. And so it's really deceptive when our public officials, when the people in charge of providing a safe service say things like this. And so it really is problematic to us at Hydroviv. And that's kind of why we're happy to be a resource for people that are trying to figure out the quality of their water. And the reports can be extremely confusing, and we have, experts who spend their whole days reading them. So if you have any questions about your water quality, please do not hesitate to reach out. You can DM us on our Instagram. You can also go to hydroviv.com, and we have a live chat feature on the lower right-hand side of the screen. And we have water quality experts that actually love talking about this type of stuff. So if you're curious about the drinking water in your city, go ahead, chat one of our water nerds, and they will tell you everything you need to know. You can also email us at hello@hydroviv.com just as another option. So I hope that this was helpful, and we'll see everyone next week for a different water quality topic. So I appreciate everyone joining in, and have a good rest of your week, everyone. See you later.